Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna be reacting to a video called How Sweden, Denmark, and Norway Almost Conquer the World. Okay, so I must be living under a rock because I had no idea they were known for conquering the world. I know that Vikings were a thing about 1,000 years ago, but I have no idea they were known for being conquerors. So I am excited. Let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
I look back at just about any country in history and pinpoint an exact moment where if things had just gone a little differently, they could be a global superpower today. Scandinavia, for instance, is just one of those rare places where they've had multiple chances and every time it just didn't work out. Sweden, Denmark, Norway, they all share a very similar history, but I'd argue they never really had their Roman Empire moment.
Yeah.
But they were close. I think they were really close. And I think a lot of people just underestimate how powerful they were in certain centuries. Now I know what you're probably saying, you're probably thinking, Drew, this is stupid. You're being stupid again. And I would agree with you, but you're thinking, you know, they don't really have that much population, they don't really have the greatest land up there. But I would argue that even if that is the case, if they were to challenge someone like the HRE, or competed for territory in the New Worlds, or even like stopped Russia from forming by expanding in a similar way they did, that'd be a pretty big deal. I think they'd be pretty powerful after that. So yeah, this is probably the first thing that came to your mind, and I think a lot of people assume this is like the closest they ever got to greatness. I mean, they almost controlled all of the British Isles, as well as huge chunks of continental Europe.
Know that it was that big.
If only they just like held on to that. Things got started when the Vikings pillaged a British monastery, because, you know, why not? It was there, and the boys were just having some fun. But this is really what kicked things off, and for the next 300 years, it would only get worse. But I should probably take this time to mention the Vikings were not one large group of people, all serving under like a massive Scandinavian Viking empire.
Oh yeah,
that sounds cool. They were actually independent smaller kingdoms that often would fight each other just for reasons. It also gets a little bit more complicated because this age in Northern Europe isn't really documented. I mean, most of the info we have on this area was written by their enemies, so could be a little bit biased, I don't know. Maybe there's some fake news in there. But keep in mind, they weren't just raiding, pillaging, and killing. They were also colonizing, which is nicer than those other three. The Vikings were surprisingly big on exploration. Their journeys led them through most of Europe, Africa, parts of Asia, and yes, even North America. Leif Erikson set out from Greenland to find easier access to wood. Fun fact, Greenland was supposedly discovered by his father after he murdered a few people from Iceland and he had to like escape or something like that. But the Vikings ended up building settlements in what they called Vinland. There's also evidence that they regularly came in contact with Native Americans, whether through trade or through war. The Vikings refer to them as uglies, I guess.
Oh no. That's horrible.
I don't even know what to say about that. But back in Europe, the North Sea Empire was probably their best chance of maybe controlling the world at the time, at least. Either if this dude didn't die so fast, he died really fast, or even better, if Harold Hardrada was successful in reconquering England. Things would have been different, but when he died, that was kind of the end of the Vikings. It was over after that. Oh, and also the Swedish Vikings were doing fun things in Eastern Europe, but very little is known about that. I just want to throw that out there. Most of the Scandinavian kingdoms were eventually converted to Christianity. They were no longer able to party like they used to. Yeah, okay, so they go around burning monasteries down. This specific what if scenario still leaves a lot of question marks. It's hard to say if this would have changed enough. I mean, it might have, who knows. They also eventually left North America because supposedly there were too many natives to fight, not enough Vikings, and their settlements were forgotten about for a while. If only they, I don't know, invested more resources or time into this continent, that would have been a fascinating universe, just a Viking new world. Oh, and before we move on, by the end of this age...
Well, it's like they said, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bike. It's sort of, why are we? I don't know, who knows what would happen.
Independent Norway would have to take a back seat to Sweden and Denmark for a while. Unfortunately, this land was just gonna get passed around between the two like a village bicycle.
Oh my god, no.
The Kalmar Union was a series of personal unions that formed a couple centuries after the Vikings. Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, as well as their colonies, were all united under a single king. Don't forget, this included parts of modern-day Finland, so they were looking pretty thick. And one of the main reasons why they formed this Nordic Avengers was to block German expansion northward into the Baltic region. Problem is, this union would occasionally break up and then kind of get back together. It was a very unstable relationship, and this was usually because the head monarch wanted even more power, but the individual countries resisted. Keep in mind, the individual countries were still separate states. They just kind of followed the monarch for certain policies. Relations between Denmark and Sweden caused several wars, and that caused the end of the union. and there was only going to be more wars into the future.
Yes.
Yeah, the Swedes wanted to go out and do their own thing, but the Danes and Norwegians, they were still cool. They still worked through their problems. But time had passed, and at this point, I don't know if the
Sweden
Danes
was
started
problem.
having feels for their ex again or something. They wanted to bring it all back together. And it was 40 years later, so you know they had something special. This war was referred to as the Northern 7 Years' War, and it was between Sweden versus Denmark, Norway, and Poland. Kind of one-sided
Poland.
there, I know, but surprisingly the Swedes held on, and the conflict would end in a stalemate. Territories remained the same, but
Okay, so
Kalmar
nothing
Union
changed.
was officially over. But wait,
Oh,
there's
that
more.
changed.
The burning hatred between these two couldn't be extinguished. I mean, it's still even kind of lingering to this day. The
Also, they hate each
declared
other.
by the Swedes to finally put an end to Denmark's grip over Nordic lands. You see, both countries' main goal was to control the Baltic Sea. That was like the big thing they all focused on. This
Why
was
is that
kind of the
important?
main reason for like all wars in Northern
Yeah.
Europe at this time. The HRE and Poland, Lithuania had depressing navies, so there was kind of a power vacuum here. Though Denmark would go on to somewhat defeat Sweden,
I would love to know what was that important about the Baltic Sea and that what everyone wanted. I don't know. Why does everyone want this?
this would be their final victory over them for 2 centuries. You know, if Denmark just somehow came off with a victory sooner or earlier, they might have been able to keep their personal union alive. Or if they just found a way to give the monarch even more powers while
Not
it
a
was
good
still a
idea.
thing, that would have worked too. You know, maybe copy the strategy of Poland, Lithuania. It really kind of worked out for them for a while. But
They had a
regardless,
Commonwealth?
a united Scandinavian nation throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance would have been scary. Their dominance over the North might have changed the landscape of Europe forever.
Yes, absolutely.
So as I said, the main goal of countries in this region was to control the Baltic Sea. And at this point, Sweden had almost done that. They were a serious superpower, and they posed a pretty big threat to just about all the nations on the continent. Sweden had already beaten Russia a few times in the past, and had proven that they were much better fighters than it might seem. But this Great Northern War would be their biggest challenge yet. It would also be the last of the Northern Wars. There were several of those in the last 200 years. A coalition formed between Russia, Denmark, Poland, Prussia, and even more, all to end this Swedish superpower. And it was a complicated conflict because
Oh, they get
it
Sweden?
went over the course of 21 years, and multiple countries like pieced
Oh, no,
out and
they
then
joined.
re-entered the war later. I don't know, it's just a big mess. But in the beginning, Sweden
God.
started off strong. They managed to force Denmark, Norway, and Poland out of the war. The problem would, of course, be Russia, as it always is. And this would end up being just
Didn't want to
another
say it.
example of a leader underestimating their size and climate. Where have we seen that before? Sweden probably should have listened to their Finnish
Feels
territory on
last
this one.
time.
They know how to beat Russia, but this was 200 years prior to that, so I don't know. Both sides suffered
That's
heavy
different.
casualties, but the Swedes were eventually defeated. This war was the beginning of Russia's rise in the Baltic region, as well as just like a new major player in Europe.
Wow,
As for
really?
Sweden, on the other hand,
trace it back.
their absolute monarchy would come to an end, along with they would lose all their like overseas territories. Kind of overseas. The Swedes had made several
what
mistakes during this
overseas?
conflict.
Where?
It's hard to say if like a total victory was even possible. I think their best bet would have been just like a status quo type peace. After their initial victories, maybe just getting out of it would have been best. They could have remained a great power in the north and then possibly sided with like Napoleon a century later. I don't know,
Maybe.
maybe both like France and a super Sweden. Maybe they could have defeated Russia. Denmark and Norway
Yeah.
ended up siding with the Big Blue Blob, but that wasn't really by choice. So who knows what the Swedish Empire would have done.
Yeah, who knows?
Now these were just a few times Northern Europe could have maybe united and, I don't know, dominated their continent, but there was also the Swedish-Polish Union. This was a short-lived personal union that lasted for 7 years. It broke apart though because of a civil war, but wow, this thing would have been scary. Then there was New Sweden
Weird.
in modern-day Delaware. This was a colony made up of Swedes, Finns, and some Dutch. The problem was it would later be conquered by the Dutch and incorporated into their new Netherlands territory. This
New
is
York.
kind of like a meme. People like to make fun of Sweden for trying this. They didn't really have like a strong enough navy to protect their stuff in America, but what if they did? Like a Swedish 13 colonies, that would have been fun. Finally,
would've been
there was
weird.
also the Danish East Indian Company and the Swedish East Indian Company, which combined at their height imported more tea than the British.
No
Unfortunately,
way.
that ended during the Napoleonic Wars. All of them, it didn't end well. But this could have made a small difference in a universe dominated by Scandinavia. Sweden is now as neutral as Switzerland, believe it or not. Their last war was also over 200 years ago. Denmark and Norway, on the other hand, yeah, they they didn't get so lucky. So each nation here had at least one or more opportunities of maybe changing the world, but it just didn't work out for anyone. Norway is usually mostly credited for the famous Viking invasions. Denmark had a chance to force everyone into their Kalmar Union, and Sweden unfortunately could not keep their empire together after the Great Northern War. But obviously, even if one of these scenarios did work out, it's hard to say what it would have led to. I think, like I said in the beginning, their best bet would probably be to take out Russia early on and then do the same thing, expanding towards Siberia. But at the same time, we're living in a universe with PewDiePie. Maybe the Scandinavians will still one day conquer the world. Bork, 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 hinga, dinga, durgan. Thanks for watching.
Big thanks to LVC, Elijah Senpai, Bruce Vacation, Swiss Argo, Maxi G, King Solomon, Ben Mo, Galley, Tanner of the Nazareth, Free Cruise, Mr. Perkelly, Cooter Donkey, Brandon Hinkle, Destiny, 9000, Mega Fat Boy, A Sneaky Gengar, Battle Buddy 1847, James Miller, Mike S. is gay, Sleeper 56, Huey Long Dog, and Alfonso M6, Militime, Double Books, KB, My Main Man Man, Likanakawa, Patchy 202, Buff, Guatemala.
The map, the crazy map at the end, I think was wild. I imagine, again, looking at the what ifs, I think it's a fun experiment, but I think you never get, I don't know, it's just hard because there's so many things that could have happened, and I don't know, think about a parallel universe in which this would have happened. I don't know, I couldn't tell you the answer. It's fun to imagine as an imagination exercise. However, who knows, what the ripple effect would have been, so I couldn't tell you how things would look like in modern times, because if something as big as this changed, then who knows what we would be. The thing, again, with the huge map at the end, imagine if Russia didn't exist, Sweden, well, Scandinavia, not Sweden. The whole Sweden managed to conquer all, they annexed all the Scandinavian country and they just one region. They changed the name. Now it's not Sweden. Now it's called Scandinavia as a whole sort of same territory. And they also expanded towards Russia. Imagine how the world would look like. There's no Russia. It's just called Scandinavia and it goes from modern Russia to Denmark. That would be crazy. Because again, it's fun to imagine because, imagine if there's no Russia. And I'm putting the example of Russia because I think it's one of the most one of the countries that has had an active part in a lot of conflicts throughout in world history, specifically starting from the 1700s, which is let's say that's where the change happened. And I don't know, it would be weird. Imagine what? I don't know, there's probably less wars, I think, I don't know, just all the conflicts. There's no, I don't know, there's no, I don't know, just crazy, I don't know. But it would be wild. I think it's funny because I never really, apparently Swedes themselves, I think it's a joke between them, according to this video of they call themselves also, I'm also a conqueror. And I mentioned it, I had no idea they were known as conquerors because when you think about they are a global superpower, that you were thinking, when I'm thinking, conquerors, the great conquerors, and they held a lot of territories, the overseas territories, or they just conquered a lot of territories, and they had, they either had a commonwealth, they had a kingdom, whatever. I'm thinking of obviously the United Kingdom. I'm thinking of France even. I'm thinking, although France didn't exactly conquer, but they had overseas territories. The Netherlands as well, and Spain obviously. There's other, I think Portugal. There's even other, there's more other countries that I think are more, a little bit more known for their whole expansion in the world, and they're known as conquerors. I'm not thinking, think of, a country that had, this global reach, and they conquer a lot of things. I'm not thinking, Sweden's not one of the names that I'm going to be thinking, not even in the top 6 or top 10. I think Denmark, though, I think that's the interesting part. I'm thinking Denmark because Denmark, I know has, but I do not still, probably not, actually, I have no idea. But I know that it has some overseas territories. There are some islands, I think in the Caribbean, I want to say. They were Danish. I don't know if they're still Danish. I don't know what's the deal there, but I know that, they went there, which again, it's a really long way to go. The really sunny climate to Denmark. But I know they did. But I hadn't heard of those. One of those islands was originally Swedish. I've never heard of that. So that's why, I'm not thinking about Sweden like that. I know, obviously, yeah, in the Midwest there was a lot of immigrants, and at this point, well, not immigrants because that happened a long time ago, but they had descendants. There's a lot of Scandinavian people. There's especially I think Swedes. That's the thing as well. I think maybe Norwegian, and not a lot of Danish. I think there's probably more Swedish and Norwegian descendants in the Midwest, especially Swedish ones, because again there was I think migration patterns. They just ended up in the Midwest, and there's a lot of people that still to this day descend from Swedish immigrants. But I don't know, but maybe that's the thing. Denmark had its own overseas territories. They had all the islands, and Norway and Sweden just went to the United States, as in we're not conquering, we're just here to move, we're just immigrating, and that's it. But that was a thing that was later on. I don't really know where exactly the immigration thing happened. I think it was maybe 1800s. I have no idea, but I don't know. Maybe that's why they took different approaches. But I think they're just known for different kind of things, and they're not known specifically for being this global superpower. And now instead of the great Commonwealth, we have the Scandinavian Commonwealth, and the United States. Oh yeah, that's part of Scandinavia. And what else? All the countries that you usually associate with the British sort of Commonwealth. Now they're part of Scandinavia. That would be crazy. I think the world absolutely would not be specifically starting with the language. People no English. Everyone would speak Swedish. I think. I don't know. It's just crazy to think about the whole sort of expansion. But it's actually, I think, really interesting to think about the whole process that led to, because they tried it several times, it wasn't in the cards for them. I think you can pinpoint. It's really funny because you mentioned there's certain, I think, countries and there's certain moments in history where, you can pinpoint exactly if this hadn't happened, then, again, the ripple effect, domino effect, none of it would have happened later on. Which sometimes, again, it's kind of insane to think about, because obviously if you think about the big sort of decisions or big things that happen, I think it's a little bit easier. But sometimes it's a little bit, I think it's just harder to think about the little things. You think about something that's inconsequential at the time, but then, you don't know, this is going to change the course of history. But obviously no one's a time traveler, so no one knows, let's do this. If you actually do this little thing, it's going to change, the world history. And of course, but again, it's just a little bit sci-fi imagination happening here. But yeah, it's really funny. I think I think that actually surprised me about the video was about Vikings, because again, my mind goes, again, I just mentioned it. I didn't know that they were known as conquerors, except I'm thinking the Vikings, right? Because I know the Vikings just went a lot of places. But he also mentioned, it was all throughout Europe, although it's kind of sad because apparently they didn't, it was only, they went through all Europe, but there's not a lot of things known about the Vikings, as in, I don't know, probably more things, more accounts of that time period. And there's a part that apparently I think was around Eastern Europe that they just do not know what happened there. Vikings were there, but we don't really know what the deal was. I think that's sad. It's just sad because, that information is lost. But also I knew obviously they'd come, they were the first sort of Europeans that visited, the American continent. But I didn't know they were constantly trading apparently with natives. I thought it was just maybe once or twice, and they just decided, no, we're not settling here, because I have no idea why, actually, because if your idea is, I'm thinking as a Viking and I want to conquer land and I want to settle new places, I don't know why you wouldn't stay there. Maybe that's the thing. They saw, no, someone's already here. Maybe we can't defeat them, although that didn't stop them before. But I don't know. Maybe they just thought it was going to be a little bit harder because I know maybe the journey took months. I don't know what they were thinking. But I thought there was just a couple of trips. I didn't know. No, apparently they were constantly trading with them. It's, oh my God, what? It's wild to think of, Vikings and natives just, converging, and I don't know, imagine that. If I'm thinking about things that almost happened, imagine if the natives and the Vikings had decided to work together. I don't know specifically against who, but maybe they just joined, and what would the world be like? Again, that probably would have changed also things in Europe, and also of course in the whole American continent. That would be crazy, but who knows? Again, fun to imagine. Someone should make a movie about this. I don't know, because it's fun to think about. But yeah, and also one of the things that it's really crazy and this video does illustrate this, is when you're thinking about, oh, the Kalmar Union, is what on earth is that? Obviously, they know this because, they study this at school, obviously. It's their own history. But I think if you ask me, I have no idea what on earth is the Kalmar Union. Okay, now I know. But when you look at all, things about the Kalmar Union or the wars themselves and the conflicts that we're constantly getting into, like they mentioned, and just all Scandinavia, just Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, you look at the list of all the countries or territories, I should say, that participated in the wars and in the conflicts, and around half of them don't exist anymore because they're everything changed. And it just goes to show how territories and political and borders are extremely political, and everything changes from one minute to another. What is this thing? It was the free city of Lubbock. It's what? No, that's not a thing anymore. That doesn't exist in these day and age. So again, you can see how much things have changed, and it's not just because obviously they're the most known ones, probably, I don't know, Prussia or Germany before the unification. But there's just so many of them that I was struck by how many countries do they actually exist, or territories exist in this day and age. None of this exists anymore because they all sort of they separated. Each one, I think, went a little bit. Probably that's the answer. Obviously, they realized that holding control over big territories is not ideal, and people want to go very small, and that's why this huge sort of what was it? There was one of the one that the Polish, Lithuanian, whatever. Obviously they realize there's just a lot of territories. Probably people have a lot of cultural differences. We have to split this up, and everything changed. But again, borders, how inconsequential they are obviously for us humans, it's just a very important thing. Again, for us, I think modern humans. But I think back in those days, it's not that they weren't important. Obviously, it was all about expansion. But holding power over, and having a kingdom or having a territory itself, it's really hard. My point it was very hard. Probably not in this day and age because there's less conflicts and there's fewer wars in general. But back in those days, it was very hard because I was born in one country or one territory, and during my lifetime, that's going to change. Where are you from? Well, originally I'm from a place called the Duchy of whatever, but it changed territories, and now I am Polish. But then by the time he died, he wasn't Polish anymore because other people came, conquered, and now he's Lithuanian actually. So it just kind of, oh my god, all the territories and stuff. It's just treaty lines, but it's not actually what cultural, things mean for people and the bonds that people, form or something. It's just very interesting. And that was it for today, and I'll see you next time. Bye!